Welcome back to Fireside, Frith, the podcast brought to you by the Ozatru community. Together we'll inspire inclusivity, share wisdom, and strengthen the bonds of our Norse pagan community. If you're new here, welcome. A little disclaimer, I had to move my office due to network issues, so this background is unexpected. Forgive me. Joining me once again today is Zach. He is a part of the local Norse pagan group here in West Texas and was a guest on episode 2 where we talked about disting. For the foreseeable future, he'll be a returning host whenever we talk about history and the holidays. So welcome back.
Thanks. I am glad to be here and discuss this thing that I don't know very much about.
Well, it's great to have you back in the virtual studio. Today we will be talking about Sigrblot. We'll go into the history, what we know from the sources, modern significance, and offer some ways to celebrate alone and in a group. Much like our episode on disting, we'll also touch base on some similarities with other pagan holidays near the same time of the year. Do you know much about Sigrblot, Zach?
I don't. I got a little bit of a snapshot while you were looking through your sources, but there's still details I'm very blank in.
Well, lucky for you, so are the sources. We'll get into that though. Let's first take a look at the meaning of Sigrblot. Jackson Crawford recently made a YouTube short explaining that Sig is common in Norse names and it means victory. And he gave some names to kind of give examples. One of them was Sigmundur, which means victory hand, Sigurður, victory guardian, and even some female names like Signy, which means new victory, or Sigrun, victory rune or victory whisper. We can agree that Sigrblot means victory bloat. The main purpose of this celebration is to gain victory in battle and welcoming the summer season. The Heimskringla has a stanza from Odin that tells us when to celebrate the main holidays in ancient Scandinavia. Zach, will you read me the quote from Heimskringla 8?
In diddly doodly. Odin established the same law in his land that had been enforced in Asaland on winter nights. There should be bloat for a good year, and in the middle of winter for a good crop, and the third bloat should be on summer day, Sigrblot, or victory bloat.
Good job.
I'm doing my best.
Aren't we all? Our next little source, the medieval German chronicler Adam of Bremen writes, if famine or plague occurs, a sacrifice is made to Thor. If there is war, a sacrifice made to Woden. If marriage is to be held, a sacrifice is made to Fricko. And that is from, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, guys, so bear with me. The Greta Hamabergensis Ecclesiae Pontificum.
A mouthful.
Yes, this observance from Adam of Bremen suggests that which gods to give offerings to for which result. It's hard to say exactly how it was traditionally observed in the Viking Age Scandinavia, due to the lack of sources. Of all the bloats Odin told of, Sigrblot is the one we know the least about. Now that we know the why, how do we know when Sigrblot took place? We know that Viking Age Scandinavians were an agricultural society. They also had only 2 seasons, summer and winter. Sigrblot is to take place roughly 4 moons after Yule. This is known as modern-day springtime or the beginning of summer, roughly mid-April. Sigrblot was performed for victory in battle, for their raids, victory over winter, and household victories. Unfortunately, that is all we know from the sources, so we're going to talk a little bit about historical background of other pagan holidays close to Sigrblot. Zach, will you tell us about Ostara?
Yes. Ostara is believed to be a celebration of the spring equinox, marking the balance between day and night, and the arrival of spring. The festival is associated with the Germanic goddess Eostre, symbolizing fertility and renewal. However, historical evidence of Eostre worship comes primarily from the writings of the Venerable Bede.
The Venerable Bede. That's his name.
I'm dyslexic. Bede in the
Bede.
Bede of the 8th century, who mentioned that the Anglo-Saxons named the month Eostre Monath after her. While little else is known about pre-Christian practices tied to Ostara, many modern traditions, such as egg decorating and hair symbolism, draw parallels to later folk customs that may have pagan origins.
Keywords may have. Now I'm going to introduce to you guys Walpurgisnacht. Walpurgisnacht or Walpurgisnacht, celebrated on April 30th, has roots in ancient pagan rituals that welcomed spring and warded off evil spirits. Its origins lie in Germanic and Scandinavian traditions of lighting bonfires to protect against malevolent forces and drive away the last remnants of winter. The festival became associated with Saint Walpurga, an 8th century Christian missionary, when her canonization day coincided with existing pagan rites. Over time, folklore wove stories of witches gathering on mountaintops, particularly the Brocken in Germany, where it was believed they held wild revelries. To counteract this perceived supernatural activity, communities would light fires, make noise, and hold festivals.
Has roots in pagan rituals, but also is Christian?
So, during the Christianization of Europe, the festival became associated with Saint Walpurga, which there's like, in one of my sources, it goes on and on about that whole situation. And it actually has different spellings than what's here. Walpurgisnacht and the celebration of Saint Walburga, and it was with a B. So it was like two different things, but they kind of meshed them together to help ease pagans into Christianity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes more sense. They did that a lot.
At least that's my understanding of it. If anyone is an expert on Walpurgisnacht or this particular time in history, then honestly, just comment, write in, let us know. Yeah, I would love to learn more. Since the podcast is for Norse paganism, I tend to give general overviews when we compare to other faiths' celebrations, just to give a little snippet of what it's about. In case someone is interested in learning more, they can check out the sources or move on to research the topic on their own, which is totally cool. And that's kind of what we're here for, just to inspire people and to show different flavors of the same time of the year with these holiday episodes. But that being said, it's not that I don't care to do a whole podcast on each of these celebrations. It's more or less just because that's not our main focus. Popcorn, your turn to read Beltane.
Beltane. Beltane, traditionally celebrated on May 1st, is a Celtic fire festival that marks the midpoint between the spring equinox and summer solstice. Its name derives from Bel, a deity associated with light, and Tene or Teen?
I think teen or tane, ten,
Like
because it turns into Beltane, so
okay.
Just do your best.
Alright. A deity associated with light, and Tane, meaning fire. Historically, Beltane was a time when cattle were driven between large bonfires to ensure their protection and fertility for the coming year. People would leap from over flames for purification, and feasting, dancing, and merrymaking were central to the celebration. Maypoles, another feature of Beltane, were used in fertility rituals, which participants weaving ribbons around them as symbolic representations of the intertwining forces of nature.
Cool.
I think Beltane sounds like a blast, in all honesty. Like, it's not just I love just having bonfires and sitting around it. Like, jumping through the fires and feasting, dancing, merrymaking, that sounds pretty great.
Yeah, one thing I would like to point out, none of these other springtime holidays have to do with fighting or war or, victories. It's more about the changing of seasons and celebrating winter's end and the other different things that go along with it.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting that each of these cultures, though, as separated as they were, they felt a need to celebrate around the same time of year.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, coming out of winter, there's a lot of hardships you had to go through, and there's a lot of excitement with the warmth of summer.
Yeah.
I don't know. I find it interesting that peoples had the same idea, and they celebrated it differently.
Oh, I agree. I love the springtime celebrations because it's not super hot like it is in the summer. And a lot of these places, being in Europe and more north, their summers are long. So it might not get very hot there, but the fact that the sun doesn't go down means that there's no cool off time. I know we've said this before on the podcast, but I am from Alaska and we have summer solstice. It doesn't get hot where I'm from, but because the earth doesn't cool down, it's just 24 hours sunlight. It's warm, okay? It's a lot. The thing about these solstice celebrations, which is not what we're talking about today, is that sometimes you accidentally celebrate a little too long because the sun doesn't go down and your internal clock doesn't tell you, hey, it's bedtime.
Oh, I had too much fun.
Yeah. Ooh. I will say that my favorite are the springtime celebrations, because if you have a celebration in spring and a celebration in fall and they're both the same temperature, springtime is going to feel warmer than the previous weeks, whereas in the fall it's like a lingering hot that hasn't gone away yet. And I don't know, I react better when it's a little bit cooler, you know?
Maybe. I like the spring. I don't know why. Where it's not coming.
So what's your favorite part about the spring?
The fact that warmth is going to come where it had been cold for a while. I am not from Alaska, but I am from up north in the Washington, Montana area. And coming out of winter, it was like, goodness, finally, we can take our jackets off. It's not quite warm enough to walk around without like a sweatshirt or something.
Right.
But it's warm enough where you're not shivering. And a bonfire sounds like a perfect thing for that time.
Oh yeah, I agree. Well, we had a really good segue, and then you wanted to elaborate on some things, and then you stopped elaborating.
I did. Thoughts gone. Brain smooth. Thoughts fall right off like water. Blooper.
Moving right along to our modern interpretation section, these rituals are to call upon the gods and get their attention to relay that they are still a part of our lives now, and bestow offerings to them in exchange for their gifts. This is the main theme in all bloats. It's a gift for gift. For Sigrblot, we really want to invoke deities associated with victory, whether it be for work, personal wins, over winter, and to inspire victories in all that we do. As far as the deities go, think Odin, Freyr, Tyr, or any other god that is associated with victory and prosperity.
Like you said it before, everything is about victory over something. It just depends on what you consider your victory at that time.
Yeah, for Sigrblot, for sure.
So like Beltane seems a lot more like disting in the sense that like you are preparing for the season to come, because summer involves a lot of work. And so like their entire thing was like, hooray, we made it through the winter, let's push forward into the summer, and we're going to start with our cattle. Sigrblot is about the victory to come after we've already celebrated coming out of winter, as opposed to Beltane, which is a lot more like disting.
Yeah. In the modern sense, what is Sigrblot to you? Featuring the words from some members of the Aesir Faith Fellowship in Iceland. Before I have Zach read our first quote, the Aesir Faith Fellowship is the English name. I will not try and dishonor them by trying to pronounce the actual name, which is in Icelandic. That being said, Zach, will you read our first quote from Johanna G. Harðardóttir?
Yes, thank you for saying that before me. I'm still going to butcher it.
Yes, you don't need to say her name. I already did.
Okay. For us, victory at this time of year is so clear. Life has won. Summer and growth are back, and life has won over death. We see tiny needles of green grass sprouting and hear the singing of the migrating birds that are back in Iceland after a long, dark winter. The children come out to play with bright smiles on their faces, and soon we will see newborn lambs and foals in this meadow. The sun melts away the last snow of the winter. That is how life wins over death.
Wonderful. Personally, I think that is a great modern interpretation since we are not currently raiding. It's a very natural way to think about it. Victory over winter. And that kind of coincides with some of those other celebrations we briefly talked about.
Yeah, it kind of seems like the modern interpretation from Johanna seems kind of like New Year. It has this, what is the word I am looking for, this enthusiastic tone about it. That seems kind of like all right, we're going to set ourselves out. We did good, let's keep going.
Yeah, especially in those northern places where the scenery changes drastically from winter to summer. And depending on where you are in the world, before we had modern technology and like heaters and, you know, things that were easy, like winter was hard work to heat your house. So it makes sense to honor the survival of those people. And winter was for survival, summer was for work. This is like the big celebration before the work starts, you know?
Yeah, and another context for it, I don't mean to do it. Again, we always come back to this somehow, but homesteading.
It's the theme of the podcast. It's that underlying
theme. It's the theme of the podcast, the unspoken theme. But like, there's so much logistics that has to go into surviving the winter when you don't have modern technology. Like one, you have to heat your house. That involves like cutting down all these trees, waiting for them to dry, and then cutting them into pieces and storing them properly. And then like the food, like they didn't have canning. I have no idea how they did that.
I'm sure somebody does, and it'll be in a later episode. like a whole episode on how did they survive. Dried meats is a thing.
Dried meats. I know the pioneers used a lot of lard to store their meats, but also like this is like 9th, 10th century Scandinavia. I don't even know if they had that.
Well, they always had a refrigerator or a freezer.
This is true. But even like crops, even just having the space to put all the food to like support your family through an entire season, like half the year, that seems pretty wild to me. There is a great cause for celebration.
Yeah.
And just the fact that like you planned properly and you worked hard enough the previous year to get to where you are.
Right. Well, and the thing with more of the less pagan celebrations, but the more capitalistic celebrations. I know right now, this time of year, a bunch of Easter stuff is out, which kind of coincides with the theme of this episode, because it is a spring holiday. There's a lot of symbolism in those things, but it's just decor now, you know? And a lot of it is trying to get you to buy all these things. And it worked. I got a little cow today. Little Easter cow. It was cute. And his name is Ivar.
You know what? Here's Ivar.
He's
You
cute.
can't see him. He is... There we go.
There you go.
Well, Ivar.
The light is very harsh in that room. I'm so sorry. But
I know. I kind of look like I'm in Twilight.
Yeah, that's okay. Worst vampires ever. Anyway, I don't want to get fought over that. So we're going to move on from the vampires. But anyway, the thing about it is like all these capitalistic type holidays, you do it just to do it. I think a lot of people forget about why we celebrate these holidays, and doing this podcast and talking about it and doing it as a ritual. A ritual to me is different than a weekly, almost like church thing. Because we do a weekly thing. I call it study group. We talk about different stuff from the sources, and then we have ritual, which is different. And during ritual, it's about honoring these things like the change of the season and really taking the time to be present with our feelings. I sound like a hippie, but not just with our feelings. Sometimes we honor the ancestors, and that gives us time to process certain things that we might have not been ready to face at, say, a funeral, or you know what I mean? Like, ritual provides something that has to do with the holiday that is a deeper meaning, you know?
Right. There's a purpose. It's an outlet and an opportunity to like venerate something higher than yourself. But yeah, just to kind of like step off of what you were saying with like how Easter is kind of capitalistic. It also just seems like more of something you do to entertain kids.
Yes.
Like, I remember Easter being super fun as a kid, but now that I'm grown up, it seems really purposeless. Like, I'll walk past the aisles of all the Easter crap, and I'm like, I don't get it.
He
like,
literally has to drag me away from it.
Honestly, like, before this, we're like, babe, we got a podcast to record, but I gotta look at the eggs.
I did. They have different eggs now. Like, I bought these little frogs, but they're like egg shapes. Anyway, we don't need to get into the stupid things I buy. For me, I used to be very angry when I stopped going to church. I never really fully believed it past the age of like 10. And anything that had to do with any holiday that had a remote thing to do with Christianity, I was like bitter about. So this is just me being vulnerable with you and anyone who listens to the podcast. I used to be very angry and very bitter because I felt a certain way. We won't go into this. This isn't a therapy session. I won't go into super details. However, I got past that, and it wasn't like the whole, oh, everything stems from paganism, da-da-da. I wasn't that kind of angry. I was just like anti-Christianity. I wouldn't even be friends with people who are Christian, which that is very ignorant. That's very rude. And I've grown, and now it's like I'm revisiting these things with a more open mind and with a more mature pagan mind. Like, I'm not just angry about things, like I'm excited about things, because these symbols that are found in Easter and all that, and other holidays like Christmas or whatever, now I can see where we get those, why we got those, and it's like, okay, I can have fun with this, honor my gods and how I want to do it, and still have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I get what you're saying, like separating the context from the fun.
Yeah.
So, like, I definitely get that. Yeah, I just don't get excited for it. I don't know. I feel like these rituals give purpose to me as well. Because we talk about this all the time, like, we want to be successful, and this is a time to revel in what you've done, and I do appreciate that.
Yeah, I do too. I think it's important to honor the good the past, and when it's bad, to set goals to make it better. You know?
Finding those improvements.
Yeah. Okay. Are you ready for another quote?
Yes.
I will say their name for you.
Okay.
And I might also be saying it wrong, but I'm going to try. So another one from the Aesir Faith Fellowship in Iceland. His name is Haukur Dor Bragason. Says,
the word victory is a tricky one, and it seems that some people have put a strong meaning in the concept where there probably wasn't one. He goes on about what the prefix Sigur means, which we've already talked about. Then he says, saying that Sigur stands for victory in war is a very narrow interpretation. There is evidence from the Ynglinga saga about Sigurdifa preparing gathered people for sharing and learning, not war. I can't see Ostara as a warrior religion. I see it as a religion of peace that respects all life. For me, the victory on this first day of summer is the victory over winter.
thoughts?
That last part, he lost me. Like we were talking about before, victory can mean several different things. And of course, it's kind of hard to separate the meaning of victory from victory in war, like he says, because while we don't have a ton of history on the religion, we do have the facts on the kind of raids that the Vikings would go on. We know that there was an aspect of warrior culture, like the Aesir are war gods.
Yes.
And there's a reason why Odin is the main deity worshipped during Sigrblot.
Suggested. It doesn't explicitly say in the sagas or in the Eddas, but I think it's a suggested kind of read between the lines type thing.
Yeah, I mean, if we were to rely on the words of Adam of Bremen that we were talking about earlier, Odin was one of the deities worshipped during this time. And he's the god of many things, but one of the things we know him to be the god of is the god of victory in war. Warriors, when they went into battle, would pray to Odin for a victory in battle. So, like, does it explicitly mean victory in war? Absolutely not, but it's kind of hard to just say there is no victory in war in this ritual.
Right.
Like, obviously today we don't worship it for that reason because most of us don't go to battle.
Yeah, I think it's different in certain career fields.
Yeah, for sure. Like, there is still war, there are still battles, and obviously most of us aren't in that niche, but you can't historically separate the fact that there was a warrior culture and Sigrblot.
I agree, and I just wonder, so the full quote is in the sources, but I will say that there is an emphasis on the warrior mentality, but also a lot of the themes with modern day Asatru push us in that homesteading kind of direction. And not to say that all Asatru or all Asatrar are homesteaders or want to be. Not everyone is like that. But it is a fairly common thing for people to want to get into that or lean towards that. And I think that stems from that perseverance to survive winter, like that is a lasting thing passed down from generation to generation. And once the Christianization happened in Europe, that didn't mean that it stopped happening. Like, it just meant that a lot of things had to go underground or got lost, or they had to alter their practices so much that it wasn't the same. This is a perfect segue into talking about why we don't have a lot of proof or a lot of evidence of what Sigrblot is. Can you take a wild guess why there isn't much in the lore, the sagas, the Eddas about Sigrblot? Can you guess?
If I were to guess, it would probably be because of the Christian perspective and who wrote it down.
Bingo! Yes, so this is a bloat for victory. If you're wanting to change an entire people's faith to yours, you don't want them to be victorious. You want them to succumb to your rule. There's not a lot of sources on it, and that's why a lot of this is recreating. We're taking historical evidence, we're taking the words written down by Snorri, by Adam of Bremen, by the Venerable Bede. Those are the sources we have, and we're trying to piece together. And so, is there a right way to do Sigrblot? Or any of these for that matter? No. Is there a definite wrong way? I mean, sure. If things are unethical or harming people, things like that.
Yeah, if you're really trying.
Yeah. There's a lot of things you have to look at. Asatru requires a lot of homework. You can always tell someone when they've been in the faith for a while, they have a lot of sources up here that they've read and reread and figured out.
Yeah, and just to chime in a little bit. I have no idea if you use this source. I just remember overhearing it. But the idea that the lack of information on Sigrblot, almost you could interpret it, and to be very clear, you could interpret it as there's not a lot of information on it because it was extremely important. Maybe one of the most important holidays.
That could be true, but that goes back to your own perspective and your own interpretation. So I'm not going to tell anyone what they should think is the most important celebration or bloat. I think that's going to be up to that person. I know a lot of people love Yule because it's something that you can celebrate in multiple facets. Yule is a very popular multi-faith celebration.
Yeah, there's also a lot we know about Yule, which makes it a lot easier to celebrate.
I think it was a lot easier for them to implement their traditions they were creating for Christmas when they were trying to convince people. So, I mean, the crossover between Christmas and Yule, there was a lot borrowed. And then there's different regions that celebrated the same thing kind of differently, and they have different Christmas demons, which is one of my favorite things that I can't wait to do an episode on later this year.
Yeah.
Or demons or bad guys, I guess. Depends on how you look at it, but we're going to get into it on those episodes.
Yeah, to rein it back into Sigrblot, though.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't mean that in any way of like, everyone should think this is super important and interpret it the same way I am. That was the perspective I read about. I think it makes sense. And I do find it interesting because within the pagan, particularly Norse pagan community, Sigrblot kind of seems to be forgotten or not known about very well. I mean, very obviously because there's almost no information on it. But I do think it's worth thinking about that it may have had a bigger impact than we historically know it to have. And like we were talking about before, it has a lot of significance when you consider the historical elements that people had to deal with when coming out of winter into summer.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to move on to some common practices with those other holidays that we talked about.
Sounds great.
Common practices for Ostara. We have spring cleaning, setting up altars, decorating eggs, nature walks, honoring the balance of light and dark, and welcoming the spring. And just for reference, the decorating eggs thing, there's a lot of controversy over whether decorating eggs came from Christianity or if it came from paganism. The pagans that would have done the ancient art of egg painting were in a different area. They were more Slavic, but that doesn't mean things weren't borrowed and the trade routes didn't move that. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, yeah, it's hard to say that it didn't, particularly when you take into context, like, the main reason the Norse even started trading and going down to the Middle East was because they read in their sagas that they came from this land.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to venture out and meet the people they came from. So, like, there was a lot of traveling. There really was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, it's hard to dismiss that.
Right. Egg decorating, I mean, it's fun. Oh, who wouldn't want to try doing that? It takes such precision.
I mean, yeah, and I think there's relatable themes that fit into Ostara.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it has a lot to deal with fertility.
Yeah, and the spring cleaning, it's probably just good to do spring cleaning no matter what your practice is. Moving on to common practices for Walpurgisnacht. There's fires, singing, particularly about springtime. It's like carols, like Christmas carols, except it's springtime songs. I don't know of any.
I would love to know of any, if anyone out there knows about them.
If anyone out there knows them, send me a Spotify link to a spring song and we can make a playlist together. That would be cool. All right, so they decorated with foliage, dressing up in costumes. They left bread and butter out for phantom hounds. That is a tradition that is upheld today, according to one of my sources. In places that they can't really do bonfires, they'll do fireworks, and they honor the triumph of light over darkness, which is basically summer over winter, rebirth and renewal. I heard it's almost like Halloween where they dress up. They dress up as witches and there's like pranks and stuff.
Oh yeah, that's the one where it was full of, April Fools. That's pretty much what it is.
Except it takes place at the end of April instead of the beginning of April. It seems really cool. I would like to travel to Germany or somewhere over there for a Walpurgisnacht experience. I think that would be really cool.
Agreed.
Moving on to Beltane. They also have fires. Of course, the maypole dancing Zach mentioned earlier. They make flower crowns. They do the walking through the smoke. like they used to with livestock. Now it's more of a people thing. Also, altars, and they honor the sun and encouraging its growth and return for the summer season. So far, we're seeing a lot of similar things. We're seeing rebirth, fires. A lot of the fires were to encourage the sun to come back, because these are ancient practices. This is before we knew the sun doesn't leave us, you know?
Was it Ostara or Eostre that had the bunny thing with the 2 litters, or whatever you call it?
Eostra is the goddess. The holiday named after her would have been Ostara or Ostar. The symbolism with the bunnies was the hare is a symbol of fertility, and especially that specific breed in that part of the world, they were mostly nocturnal. And during the springtime, they would mate in the daytime. So they would just see these rabbits everywhere. And the thing about the rabbit that you're thinking of is that it can get pregnant, and then it can get pregnant with a new litter while they're still pregnant from another specimen. Yeah, mate. That's the word. From another mate.
Yeah, sorry, I just remembered that while we were talking about rebirth and the themes of most of these holidays.
Yeah, rebirth and fertility.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Fertility for the crops, the land. We have new baby animals popping up around that time. So it makes sense that fertility is wound up in there with the return of the sun and springtime and the flowers.
Didn't people also in that day and age, like, they would try to purposely plan their births during the spring?
I don't know.
Like, they
Maybe.
didn't want their children to be born during the winter because of how hard it was, so they would wait until the new season.
Yeah, because the chances of survival back before we had modern medicine, the chances of survival of having a baby in the winter were not great. Because food is scarce, you know, you have to kind of ration your meals. It's hard to take care of yourself and a child, but when it's inside of you, you take care of you, your body will take care of the baby. So I think that is a true thing because of the weather. All right, key differences between Sigrblot and the others. We have the warrior versus fertility themes. Sigrblot is about victory and preparation, whereas other pagan events, they seem to focus more on renewal and fertility. Sigrblot is often more focused on sacrifice for success, while our other celebrations we talked about today are more focused on balance and renewal. Moving on to practice. How do we practice these rituals in modern day? First, we're going to talk about solo practice. For solo practitioners, these holidays can be observed through meditation, altar offerings, seasonal feasts, and personal rituals that align with each festival's themes. So, Zach, I know you're not going to be here for Sigrblot, but if you were to have an indoor altar for Sigrblot in a common place like a bookshelf or a mantle altar, what would you put on yours?
You could really personalize it. Make it whatever you're celebrating your victory over. If it's your profession or your craft, like, put the things you're proud of in that altar space. If you want to lean into the warrior thing, put a battle axe up there or something. I don't know. Or, I mean, you could center it towards the deity that you're celebrating your victory with. Like for Odin, you could put symbols of Odin up.
Why not both?
Oh, yeah, it doesn't have to be one or the other. These are just ideas.
Right.
So I have been putting more of my research and time into Odin recently. For Sigrblot, I will probably be honoring him.
So Odin, he's who brought us the runes. If you were here, I don't know what your situation's going to be like, where you're going, but if you were here, maybe putting up a figurine or a painting or something like that of Odin, whether bought from an artist or something you create, and then put your runes up there, maybe putting a spearhead up there, maybe putting whatever you want to be victorious, so that's going to be more personal.
Right. Dang, it's kind of hard to think of because, like, my goals that I have for this, it's kind of challenging to think of what I would put up there. It seems kind of vain to put, like, a symbol for money up there. Like, finance is one of my big goals, and getting a good hand on, and my fitness. Kind of seems weird to put a dumbbell on an altar.
No, man. Gotta get those gains.
Creatine!
Oh my god. Put your creatine bottle on the altar. Hail Odin, bless my creatine.
Hail the gains!
I love it. I mean,
honestly, I think the rest of my battle buddies would think I'm really freaking weird.
They already do, it's okay.
I know.
No, I think that's great, though, because your reasons for that are very Nordic. So,
honestly, Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up. I wasn't even thinking about that. Like, instead of the goal itself, the purpose of the goal, and putting a symbol up of the purpose.
What I was going to say is that you're not just wanting to work on your fitness to look good.
That is one of the reasons.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not what you told me.
No, there's multiple reasons.
Obviously, there's going to be multiple reasons, but it's not the main reason. You've told me that you want to be able to protect your household, and that's very important. I think you're right. Putting things on your altar that symbolize your reasoning for things, that's going to be something that more aligns with Victory Bloat than just the thing. Because the thing you can put in your symbols when you do your oaths, like, this is what I'm going to do. And for a bloat, for Sigrblot, having an altar for it, I think is more of the reasoning behind the goal. So I think you're on the right track there. But everything's up to interpretation. So you do you, and I support it. All right. Outdoor altars. A lot of these rituals have to do with blood sacrifice. So think food. Like in modern day, it's not like we all have farms and all have a ritual animal that we plan on slaughtering for, it's not as common as back in the day when that was your main food source, is having your own farm. However, you can sacrifice meat that you get from the grocery store. Animals are considered messengers of the gods, and feeding them at your outdoor altar with the food you sacrifice will establish good communication with the spirits and gods and yourself. If you were home during this time, if you were to have an outdoor altar, what would you like to put on it?
It's not nearly as common to prepare and slaughter an animal during your bloats as, it was. I have seen some sources and some people that practice by using raw meat and using whatever blood they can find from that. A thought that I had was also, like, what's important to me? Like, what kind of food is important to me?
Chicken nuggets?
Yeah. Not just that, but, like, any kinds of, like using that as your sacrifice. And, like, we've been doing that where we'll take a section of each dish that is brought to our rituals, and then we'll throw them into the fire as a sacrifice. I think that could also apply here.
For bloat, that's definitely something I do. As a solo practitioner, though, you could cook dinner and sacrifice that, or you can leave it raw. In the YouTube channel Norse Magic and Beliefs, the owner of the channel, he's great. He has a whole video of what him and one other person did. They did steaks and bread, and they left it on the altar, and he had a necklace he carved some runes into, put it on the outdoor altar to kind of bless it. So I think that's something cool that you can do as a solo practitioner.
What else could you add to an outdoor altar? I mean, there's obviously like a lot of the things you normally do for bloat, but what makes it Sigrblot?
Well, here's the thing. As a solo practitioner, you might not want to, or you might be in a city and you might not be able to do a full-scale bonfire. Candles, color associations with candles, that you can use those instead of a bonfire, because if you're in a city and you don't have access to a safe place to have a fire.
Yeah, one of the members of our ritual group, I don't know if it was like the time before last study group we had, he talked about what he did for Yule, and he found just a little tiny battery powered fireplace where it just like had a little light and the little flames, and he put that up for Yule. Honestly, just doing what you can to celebrate, if you want to celebrate, I think is a great thing, because there's so much we can't do. You have to find a way to represent it in some way.
Right, and the main thing, it's the communion with the gods. It doesn't have to be by the book, because sometimes it's just not going to be due to living situations, or, no one should be going broke over ritual items. You can use a cup. You don't have to use it. Sometimes you just got to make do, and that's okay. That's part of being resourceful and still doing that to establish that connection.
Got to be industrious.
All right, so here are some suggestions. For Sigrblot, you can light a candle to honor Odin, Freyr, or other deities. You can write down your personal goals for the upcoming season, or make an offering of mead or bread. I know if you live in a big city, it might be difficult to just leave raw meat out. I'm sure some places it might be illegal because it might bring in animals that they might not want. Setting personal intentions for victory and doing a solo bloat. That's Sigrblot. We're going to move on to Ostara. For Ostara, you can decorate eggs, you can plant seeds, which you can do even if you live in a big city in an apartment. They have little pots that you can get, and you can order seeds online if you don't have those or whatever near you. You can use those seeds as a symbol of new beginnings. You can also perform a sunrise meditation to welcome the balance of light and dark. For Walpurgisnacht, you can light a candle or a small fire if you can to ward off negative energy. You can read folklore about witches or play music and dance in honor of the spirits of the season. For Beltane, you can perform a fire ritual or a candle ritual, which candles are fire, my bad. You can create a flower crown, or you can leave an offering to nature spirits in a local park or forest. Just keep it ethical. And those are all the suggestions I have for those kinds of celebrations. What say you?
What say I? We kind of talked about it when we were talking about like outdoor altars and like getting creative with it, being industrious, and just finding something to represent something else if you don't have that resource or can't use that resource. One of the other videos that we watched as a resource was from the Northwoods Kindred, and something that you saw that you enjoyed, and I thought it was pretty cool too, was how they incorporated the egg. Like, it was a Sigrblot, but they also incorporated the egg decorating and the plant seeding at the same time.
Elements from Ostara. And
what they did is they had hard-boiled eggs, and they had a lot of them, and he led his ritual group, his kindred, to take an egg and to write down the runes that best represented their goals and what they wanted for the next year. And they took that egg and they buried it into a pit, and they all took part in putting the dirt over those eggs. That represented the the seed of their goals growing throughout the year.
For those of you who are not watching us on YouTube, that are just listening to the audio only, our cat just put his face up to Zach's webcam.
It was quite adorable.
He became the star for a second. He's like, Ostara? Are you talking about me? I thought the Northwoods Kindred, adding that little bit of Ostara in there, that was a cool thing. So I always ask, like, after the last ritual, I'll be like, hey, do you want to add any elements from XYZ into this? We do a bloat every time we do our rituals at the traditional times to do bloat, but I'm always welcome to the idea of adding something else. Like, this year we're going to do the Northwoods Kindred style Ostara edition. And maybe next year we'll do Walpurgisnacht or Beltane. We'll see. I'm thinking Walpurgisnacht to Beltane, since they happen right next to each other. The cat's back. That it should be a camping event. Personally, I think if we do it in 2026 as a group, it should be a camping event. That sounds fun.
I think it would be. And much like how when you're in different phases of your life, you turn to a different deity or a different spirit, I think the same could be said of celebrating different holidays. While some of these have very similar meanings, like, they all have a different element to them that you can incorporate into your faith. And I don't think it has to diminish anything about your worship. But it also, I love the Northwoods Kindred. I don't want to talk about them too much because we're not the Northwoods Kindred. But I think they're a great resource just because they have a good balance of historical context, but also incorporating new practices and just being creative.
Yeah.
They show a level of confidence and ingenuity that other people can use in their own practices and groups.
Right. Yeah, I really do appreciate that about them. And you know, something I just thought of, like, we talked about solo ideas that you could do. We talked about indoor and outdoor rituals. Something we didn't talk about is what you can do as a soldier on deployment.
Yes, very relevant.
Since you won't be here for Sigrblot, and we don't really know what your experience is going to look like, maybe you and I can do like a mini episode on how that went, what you did, what was a relevant thing for you, if any, or if it was more of just like a solo time where you took a walk or did a thing.
Yeah, I would be open to doing like an update video on that. I think it'd be interesting, especially because TAC, the group this podcast is for, is mainly military affiliated. So I think it's relevant to the people listening.
I think our board of directors has a lot of former and current military people in it. Yes. I don't know if I would say mainly, but I'd have to look at the numbers.
I do think it's relevant, and even if it's not specifically relevant to somebody, there is an element of showing how to make things work. And it's going to be new for me because like I've never celebrated this before, and it's going to be very strange for me to do it on my own without my wife to help guide me through these things. So I think it will be a self-growth moment that could better someone else's practice by seeing me stumble like a baby deer.
By sharing your experience. My episode with David Nix, we talked a lot about being a service member, and he actually talked about little field kits, like little tins that are like pocket altars and stuff like that for when we're in the field and need that time and space to practice, because we're still a lot of that time if we're in the field, because a field exercise is not wartime, it is practicing for wartime. So we're still allowed, not to say that we're not allowed during wartime, it's just...
Yeah, it's more of a conflict of opportunity.
Yes, exactly. So that being said, I think it is important because we have so many soldiers that are Norse pagans, and a lot of the junior enlisted, they are unaware of things like, well, I can still practice even though I am deployed or even though I'm in the field, you know?
Yeah, I think it can be fairly difficult or at least embarrassing to do it in the military. There's so much peer pressure. That's pretty much the entire backbone of the military. The moment you get into basic, it's just peer pressure. Drill sergeants don't just berate you. They berate you in such a way that all of your peers are staring at you, and you are forced to conform and change how you think and how you do things because of the peer pressure. And that's carried out of basic in the way we talk to each other and the way we watch each other. So I think it can be very, in a way, at least internally, very ostracizing to have to do that alone around people that don't know, especially with the crude humor that a lot of soldiers have.
Well, yeah.
A lot of the times they don't even mean it in a mean way. But for example, the NCOIC of my shop, he likes to call me a heathen bastard. And he doesn't even mean it in a mean way. When my first sergeant heard it, he was kind of like, that's EO, dude. Don't say that. I think it's funny, but that kind of humor can weigh on someone, especially if it's from several of your peers, especially when you're trying to practice and make a solace practice in somewhere where you don't really have an opportunity for privacy.
Yeah, I can see that. I've never had an issue. Usually people are always like, what's this mean? Can you do a reading for me? And I don't, maybe it's also because I'm a female, so I'm inherently approachable, I guess, even though I have this face. Whatever. Are you ready to move on to group celebrations?
I am.
I know we talked about it a little bit already, just here and there, but now we're going to talk about group practice. Group observances can include community bloats, feasts, bonfire gatherings, dance celebrations, and rituals that honor the deities and spirits associated with each festival. So for Sigrblot, something you do is host a communal feast like a potluck. You can give toasts to the gods and ancestors and share stories of personal victories. I know that sounds similar to a stumble, but you can do all of that in a non-ritual way after or before your bloat for Sigrblot. For Ostara, you can organize an egg hunt, which we will be doing this year at Sigrblot because we have a lot of little kids. For Ostara, you can organize an egg hunt, hold a seasonal nature walk, or create a group altar to honor the renewal of life. For Walpurgisnacht, you can participate in a local festival, because there usually are some around that time. You can hold a storytelling session about witchcraft and lore, or you can gather to light a huge bonfire. For Beltane, you can set up a maypole for a group dance. My ritual group has told me that in years past, that doesn't matter how much education you give on the dance and how it's supposed to weave, that it will get tangled up, because that's just the nature of our group. Maybe your group will have a better luck at this, but if you set up a maypole for a group dance, good luck. You can also enact a reenactment of an ancient fire leaping tradition. I highly suggest don't wear synthetic clothing if you plan on jumping over a fire. Make sure you know your fire safety. I used to spin fire, and one thing you want is natural clothing, because it won't melt to your skin. It'll just catch on fire and then hopefully leave your body. If you plan on doing that, make sure you have a large bucket with water in it with some wet towels in there, or you can just walk through the smoke. That's the way safer route and highly more encouraged. Use caution.
Yeah, PSA, fire isn't safe. Exercise caution.
You are correct.
Yeah.
This next little section is how to organize a modern Sigrblot gathering. I know we just talked about some light suggestions on how to celebrate with a group. This is more so talking about how we organize our group, and for you to take inspiration, or if you think I'm doing it completely wrong, please send me a message, because if I can make this any easier on myself, I will. All right, how to organize a modern Sigrblot gathering. We make all our events on Facebook, but we sort of discuss them beforehand. This year we talked about all of the events we wanted to do at Disting. In a traditional fashion, we had an all thing to discuss our events and how often we'd like to have them.
For Disting, when we had our all thing, it was very much like what kind of activities do you want to see? How often do you want to have them, like you were just saying? And getting an idea of what kind of settings that our group is willing to have and when they're willing to have them, so that we can best coordinate what's going to happen.
Exactly. And one thing we talked about was doing Sigrblot with an egg hunt. This group has been around for over 10 years, and they traditionally do some sort of egg hunt for the kids and beer hunt for the adults. But yeah, it's all in the tradition of springtime, fun, new, renewal, all that stuff. That being said, so the bloat structure for our group varies slightly than the traditional bloat that you can find online. So we start with a cleansing, whether it be through smoke, like sage smoke or burning flowers, what have you. Some sort of smoke.
So when we sage, we ask, do you release all ill will? The intention is that we come into the circle with the intention of accepting whatever is there and releasing any darker, unpleasant thoughts.
So our ritual group has been around for over a decade, and though they are primarily Norse Pagan, they used to be a registered grove with ADF, which is a druid group, and ADF has requirements for rituals. Rachel and I had this conversation about the saging, and she said she didn't feel comfortable saying you release all ill will to enter here, because that was something that was a requirement from ADF, and I'm not going to try and pronounce that, so we're just going to ADF. It's a druid thing. That being said, her and I were joking about it, and she was like, yeah, because you and I were fueled by rage, right? Do you release your ill will? I was like, not really. I use it to keep me going. Same. Okay, cool. She's like, I don't want to say anything at all. Is that okay? Yeah, absolutely okay. We are not druids. If someone here more aligns with a druid belief, you can say it for them, but if it doesn't feel right to you, then don't do it.
I think it's funny that you talk about living off of rage, because you kind of sound like a guts berserk.
That was cleansing. Grounding. You have somebody else lead our grounding, because like I said earlier, I'm not a very calming person. I am fueled by rage, as we say. And it's one of those, close your eyes, plant your feet, really get into this present body. Leave all your worries of work. Everything else can leave. This is now going to be your time with the gods. We need you to prepare yourself to commune with the gods. That's what that's about. I do not lead the grounding ritual.
The grounding ritual just helps for trying to get the rest of the group to mellow down mentally and prepare themselves for the ritual. It's not just the cleansing, it's also the mind and making sure that it's ready to accept whatever's coming.
Yes, we did cleansing, we did grounding, now we do the hammer rite. I'll say this, before joining this group, I have never done the hammer rite because I didn't believe in it, I didn't agree with it because of its Wiccan origins. However, like I said earlier in the podcast today, I am no longer angry about things that are different than myself. I am more welcoming towards it, and some people do a really good hammer rite, and I've been more accepting of it in the recent years.
Yeah, and I think despite whatever its origins may be, it's ultimately up to the practitioner. If that is what helps you set the mood and the setting to welcome the gods to your ritual space, then absolutely I think that is a crucial part of your practice.
Something changes, at least in our group, and I don't know what it is specifically. I'll probably think about it as soon as we're done recording this podcast, but there's something different that happens when we do the hammer rite. And I don't know if it's because this group has been together since long before you and I joined it, but it's like everybody knows. We talked about this during our Yule ritual when James, who was a guest on episode 1, blew the horn and every animal on our street went silent. I live in the city and every dog stopped barking. after he did the hammer rite and he blew the horn. After that, I got chills, and it kind of makes me respect the hammer rite a little more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is intention. Like with most magic and most faiths, that's really what it comes down to is intention.
Right.
And I think the hammer rite can be a very solemn way of introducing that sanctity of the ritual and loudly announcing it to everyone to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. The next part, and this is not a typical thing in bloats, but I always announce what we are gathered here for. And maybe that comes from my history of doing weddings where it's like, we are gathered here today to witness the union of such and such and so and so. They do that at every wedding. We have a lot of newcomers every single ritual so far because there's still so many people where we work on post that don't know we exist. And so as people learn, we get new people or different faces every time. So I always want to announce, but it's also a reminder to our returning folks why it's important and what we're doing here today. And so that is kind of the beginning of my part as the ritual leader, what I do.
When it comes to running events, announcing what you're doing and how you're doing it is usually a good practice, as the way people think is when they know what's happening, it's easier for them to follow and concentrate.
Oh yeah.
So like by announcing, hey, this is the ritual we're doing, and these are the steps we're going to take in just a few moments.
Yes, because even though it's posted on our Facebook groups, nobody actually reads it. They just know that if you look at the very bottom of the details of the event, that I always put bottom line, what to bring, what we're doing.
Right time, place, uniform.
Yeah, that's all they need to know.
Invocation.
Invocation. At this point, we should all know what that means. That's when we hail the deities, whichever ones we're going to talk to. Then we bless our sacred mead. For victory blow, it will be mead. And then we do a round of toasts to the gods we're honoring. At this time, you can do a second round for heroes or ancestors, and a third round for toasts and boasts, but that's optional. It's not required. Then everyone gets spragged with the pine needle, and the leftover mead gets offered to the gods. It gets poured into the sacred space outdoors. At this time, we usually have a moment of silence before closing the ritual, or by asking if there's any other work that needs to be done, which I make an announcement beforehand. Hey, if you have anything that needs to be blessed or this or that, bring it forward beforehand so that I'm aware of it. I say beforehand, I mean, they can tell me the day of. It's fine. Yeah. So that moment of silence, not everyone does it that way. There are definitely different formulas, and especially if you're a mixed faith group or eclectic of some sort, you can add or subtract how you see fit for your group activity.
Sigrblot. It is about victory, and that doesn't necessarily mean in battle, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with anything except what you find that you have become victorious in the past year and what you hope to find going forward.
Well said.
There are many different holidays that happen around the same time, but Victory Bloat is very set apart and it stands alone in what it represents. And I think that is a very interesting thing, that it is different than everything else.
As in like the other holidays that we talked about. Yeah.
Yes, like in reference to Ostara, Walpurgisnacht, Beltane. I know I pronounced that poorly. Walpurgisnacht.
Nacht is night in German.
Yes.
So it's Walpurgisnacht, if you were to say it in an American accent.
Yes. The bottom line is to keep the theme of the holiday and celebrate it however you seem fit or however you're able to celebrate. You can practice alone and you can practice with others, and how we practice is how we practice, and you can take and subtract how you feel is needed for yourself and your group or the others you lead.
Very well said. Thank you for that. Springtime pagan holidays like Sigrblot, Ostara, Walpurgisnacht, and Beltane, they offer rich traditions that have evolved over time, blending ancient practices with modern interpretations. Whether celebrated alone or in groups, these festivals provide meaningful ways to connect with the cycles of nature, embrace themes of renewal and victory, and foster community bonds, those bonds with your gods and spirits. As we honor these traditions, we not only preserve cultural heritage, but we also find personal relevance in their timeless themes.
I do think I have learned quite a lot in the past, however long it's been since you started put together the sources for this podcast. I kept hearing the names of these holidays and the names of these deities that aren't part of our pantheon, and it was really freaking confusing. Kind of like our episode on disting. Okay, what's disting? Okay, what's Sigrblot? Okay, what's charming of the plow? How are these similar? How are they different? It was very confusing for me to have like almost 3 names for the same thing, and I felt very similar.
There was other ones too. There was Acerbot, however the Anglo-Saxons pronounce things.
Yeah, and it was really hard to pinpoint what practices belong to which holiday. So
Right.
After this, I think I have a very decent handle on what Sigrblot is, what these other holidays are, and the differences between them and how we as heathens practice Sigrblot.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to be clear with this episode is that we only have so many sources for Sigrblot. And the reason why talking about those other holidays was to also mention that none of those are mentioned in our sources. One source that is going to be in the show notes, they talked about having a quarrel with someone from TAC, from our organization, about how they said, no, Ostara was not a Scandinavian thing. It was a Germanic thing. Which I know there's a lot of overlap. That is one of those things that we know that there's a difference. That was my point in reading the sources and what we have on Sigrblot, which is so little. The only thing we have really is the name and the time, that it was the 4th moon after Yule. Well, that's our episode. If you've made it this far, we really appreciate your patience as we talk through these awesome and interesting themes. Thank you for joining us on Fireside Frith. If you have any questions, stories, or reflections you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you at podcast@theosatruecommunity.com. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Check out our socials at Fireside Frith Pod or theosatruecommunity.com. Until next time, may your hearth be warm and your path be guided by Frith and wisdom. Skull!
Let's go!
Where's your cup? No, nothing?
Let's go! Clink. It's empty.
Thanks. All right, I'm going to take this time to read our sources. Our music is by hot_dope and not prod. Edited by myself and produced by the Osatru community with special guest Zach. My sources are norsemyth.org, Sigrblot, What is Victory, sacred-text.com, pagankids.org, aldsidu.com. The blog is called The Wiccanization of Osatru Ostara versus Historical Pre-Christian Sigrblot, bpl.org, britannica.com, cpre.org.uk, beltane.org, enchanted-hollow.com, and the YouTube channels of Ocean Keltoy, The Norse Witch, Norse Magic and Beliefs, Alina Luna, and Northwoods Kindred.
Bye.
Bye.